welcome to this event that's been organised by the European Association of Energy Services Companies, the Global ESCO Association and the International Energy Agency. Whilst we're welcoming people into the room, just a few notes of introduction. Energy service companies are, of course, a proven tool to increase energy efficiency and decarbonise priority sectors for sustainable energy transitions, which of course are key to achieving Europe's energy independence. But I think we would all agree that we would like to see ESCOs achieving even more than they've been doing so far. So we want to investigate ways of making that happen. So we'll discuss the needs of the ESCO industry, the existing enabling framework and emerging opportunities in Europe. And these will be complemented by insights and examples that we found in other parts of the world. So I'm going to be your moderator for this event. My name is Slade, and I work with the IEA. And we're going to have a great lineup of speakers who I'll introduce one by one as we come to them. And we're also going to do some polling to try and see what you think and try and glean some information from our audience. So if we could start with the first poll, please. So this is our first question for everybody. It's quite an obvious question, but we'd like to know, in your opinion, does the current energy crisis pose additional threats to the European ESCO market, or does it provide a window of opportunity? Now, you should find the link to this poll in the chat, either on the webinar system or on YouTube, and it's also shown up on this slide here. So we're very interested in your views on this. Does the current crisis pose additional threats but provide opportunities, or generally provides a window of opportunities? So if you'd share your views on this, please, we'd be very appreciative. So we've got 2 people voting so far. I think the most obvious answer, of course, is that it does both things. But let's give a few moments to see if we get any other comments from people. We can come back to some of these questions once we've heard from our speakers, of course, as well. Okay, so perhaps we'll leave it there for this first question, and then go on to the next one, if we may. So, as a follow-up, given most people think that this is an opportunity as well as a threat, but mainly positive, do you expect the ESCO market in your country to expand or contract in 2022 in the light of the current energy crisis? We'll be taking questions through the chat as we go through this set of presentations. So if you'd like to qualify your statement here or make a comment about it, please do feel free to share through the chat process. We'll try to come back to some of these questions and ask our speakers what they think of them too as we go forward. So we seem to have 8 active voters at the moment, so we'll stop there, if we may, and 9. And we'll move on to our first presentation. Like I say, we should have plenty of time to come back to some of these issues. So our first speaker, I'm absolutely delighted to be able to introduce Paolo Bertoldi, who's of course known to everybody in Europe who's involved in energy efficiency. He's currently senior expert at the European Commission's Joint Research Centre, and he's also a member of the board of the Global ESCO Association. So Paolo, the floor is yours.
Showing some slide of the Global ESCO network, because they organize this workshop, are a very important body that gather all the national ESCO association experts like myself, ESCOs, and is promoting the concept throughout the world at the political level, and in particular is making the connection between the climate change mitigation effort and the role the ESCO and the energy service can bring to this. Because we want to mitigate, we know there is a large potential in building and other facilities, and ESCO can facilitate this and really make a big contribution to our energy and climate goals in Europe, but also the global target to reaching carbon neutrality by 2050. So the introduction was enough to introduce myself. Thank you again, Melanie. And I'm going very quickly through this presentation to leave time for discussion. Basically, the GRC, where I worked since 2001 after working in Brussels at DGNR, has been following the ESCO market and the energy performance markets in the EU since 2005. We look at the development with regular report more or less every 2-3 years to see some changes. Very much focus on the status, barriers, driving factors, and always basically try to get the data from the expert, ESCO themselves, national energy efficiency policymaker, and other experts in national energy agencies, for example. That's a list of previous reports, which are all available in our website. Of course, things that went back in 2007 have changed a lot, but not so much as we expected. And this is a very important point. ESCO started to operate in the 90s. There was a lot of promotion already in 2006 with the Energy Service Directive. We were expecting basically to take over and look for projects. Every basically large facility in Europe would have been a candidate for an ESCO project, but it was not the case. The ESCOs in many member states are still, you can count them on your hands, and the project might be 50, 100, no more than this per country. So very disappointing in relation to the large efficiency potential we have in the EU. So basically, we try to prepare a survey, which is always a bit adapted, but it's a basic structure, asking information on the size of the market, the number of ESCOs, the type of contract, the duration of contract, etc. Excuse me, I have a problem here with the battery. Okay, I hope I can survive. And then basically, what we realize in this year that there is less interest to reply to our surveys. So perhaps there is either less expertise, or all expertise are very busy, or might be a fatigue to report. We don't know what's the case. So we collect qualitative data on the status of the ESCO market in terms of barriers, drivers, opportunities, basically the feeling of the situation, and then I try to have also some quantitative data within some numbers. Of course, we try to, energy service is very broad. Energy service, then you have ESCOs, which should be more focused on providing energy efficiency solution and taking some kind of risk. What we would like really to focus energy performance contracting, where there is a guarantee on the result of the project, basically the energy savings, and the remuneration of the ESCO is somehow connected to meeting the guarantee. And this is very, very important to state that it is might be the best way to implement this type of project, because transfer the risk and technical financial risk from the end user to a specialized company. Of course, they are more complex. They may attract the private investment, in particular in the public sectors. But as I say, they need accurate monitoring verification, which may increase cost. Maybe guarantees are on the conservative side in order to avoid ESCO being short of the guarantee and then having to pay themselves back at the end user. So very, very a lot of safety margins. If the savings are 40%, maybe they guarantee only 20%. And let's say transaction costs could be very high. So very much focus on large facilities where there are large savings, that the savings can not only pay back the ESCO, but also cover all the transaction costs involved. There is still a different type of contract, like guarantees or share savings, where the financial risk is either and the debt is on the book of the end user or on the ESCO. And there is, of course, many other contracts that type like supply of energy and management of the energy facilities, It's like energy contracting type of contract, or purely facility management, so optimization of the system without any guarantee, without very little installation refurbishment of the existing system. Sometimes, so energy efficiency is still procured by public authority, in particular by traditional tenders. So I want to buy a new boiler, I want to change my lighting, so without any guarantee. Very often this is also supported by grant, and there is always sometimes a positive impact by grants to energy performance contractors, sometimes a competition, because they are not really geared to be used by an ESCO implementing a project, but mainly going to end user, which is not looking sometimes for an ESCO due to complexity. So number of contracts is a busy slide. As I say, we don't see this growth that we expected. We are more or less flat since 10 years. So there was first the crisis in 2012 to 2015, then a slight increase, then the COVID period, and now we should see a rebound, but it's not that clear yet. And so we have very high energy prices, and energy efficiency is as high in the policy agenda at EU level as never been so much high. So that should be also very important. Everybody talks about conservation energy efficiency nowadays. So here we have another slide showing the movement from over time, in particular in the public sector. And you see many markets are still pink or red, means not much development yet, not much provision of services or appetite of engaging in energy performance contracting from end user. And of course, we also estimate the quality of the market, and also the sufficiency. It means there is enough provision of and offered by ESCOs to undertake project, and will they satisfy the demand for it? And sometimes is a problem with the demand, sometimes is a problem with the supply. There is not enough business willing to offer this type of complex services with sometimes a difficult contract. The market size is, again, not much change. Some markets are shrinking, some markets are enlarging, but it's not really a homogeneous growth throughout the 27 member states growing the market. Of course, 2022 is still ongoing, so we hope that it will increase. But we have two competing factors. On one side, very high energy price, which should drive more investment in efficiency. On the other side, also an increased cost of financing, higher interest rate, which of course there is always the need to borrow money for make the initial investment, being the end user or being the ESCO.
Perhaps we could go to the next poll and see if Paolo manages to recover his power. If that would be okay. Thank you very much. So, whilst Paolo's recovering his power system, another question for everybody. And I think this is, a really pertinent question given what Paolo's just told us about the fact that the ESCO market in Europe hasn't really grown in the way that we might have expected and might have hoped. So we need to understand better what the problem is there. So what kind of barriers and instruments should the EU policy focus on to make energy performance contracts an effective tool to accelerate the energy transition and fight the current energy crisis in Europe? So we have options here of clearly the regulatory and market design. We have financing and funding opportunities. We have contractual arrangements for accounting, promotional and technical assistance, or others. And if you go for any others, then please let us know what you mean in the comments, so that we can come back to that and maybe ask our speakers some questions. Okay, so we've got a bit more of a range of answers coming in now, and a few more voters too. So regulating market design, I think that's a really important question, and we need to come back to this. We're very interested to know, what governments can do to help facilitate the development of an ESCO market. So interesting points there. Financing and technical assistance, they're coming through as perhaps lower priorities. And that's interesting because a lot of people do say that there's plenty of money out there. It's that it's not flowing to the energy efficiency projects or to the ESCOs for some reason. We've got contractual arrangements and accounting coming through as we can see here as really important mechanisms. We know for example from countries like China, where the ESCO market, of course, is the biggest in the world, that they did have to change accounting practice in order to make that happen. So learning from those types of examples is very important to us. So I think now we'll go on to the presentation from Margot Pinault, if we may. Margot is a policy officer working on ESCOs at DG ENA in the European Commission. And Margot, we're very much looking forward to your presentation. You clearly are in the hot seat at the moment, so the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Melanie, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Very happy to be here to present you indeed the latest developments of energy efficiency policy at the EU level, with some focus, of course, on the topic of today, so the provisions that are promoting energy performance contracting. So let me go to the presentation directly. Trying to change my slide. Okay, so in my presentation, I will start with the general framework of the revision of the Energy Efficiency Directive and generally revision of energy and climate legislative framework under the so-called Fit for 55 package, where the aim is to strengthen the regulatory framework for climate and energy in order to deliver on the increased climate target, which is of 55% of greenhouse gas emissions reduction in 2030. So for that reason, in order to be able to reach this target, several pieces of legislation, European legislation, are being revised, and today I will present you Energy Efficiency Directive and also some elements of the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. But another very important element, already mentioned, of course, by the previous speakers, of the general, let's say, context is the energy crisis that we are living now in Europe and that is caused by Russia, its aggression on Ukraine, and a disruption of fuels delivery to Europe. And the Commission, to remedy this critical situation, adopted in March and then in May the REPowerEU plan, where the aim is to reach independence from energy imports from Russia through diversification of supply, acceleration of renewables deployment, and accelerations of energy efficiency, so acceleration of the energy transition. So because it really makes the best sense to accelerate the energy transition in the current context, of course. And according to the Commission estimation, it is possible to phase out dependence on Russian gas, oil, and coal by 2027. But to deliver on it, we really need to accelerate the full implementation of Fit for 55 proposals to strengthen them. And this is what is about this REPowerEU plan. So concretely, this REPowerEU plan contains the several elements which you see here, the communication, this EU Safe Energy communication, this EU Safe Energy plan, and also, last but not least, the amendments to renewable energy, energy performance of buildings, and energy efficiency directives. So, as regards the EU Safe Energy Plan, it takes two approaches. It is focusing on achieving the short-term energy savings through behavioral change, but also it is stressing that we need also to make structural changes in mid and long term and moving to more energy efficient operation of our economy. So these two angles are both, let's say, presented in the EU Safe Energy Plan. And following this, there is also the proposal of changing the target in the Energy Efficiency Directive. So as part of the REPowerEU amendment, the Commission has proposed to increase energy efficiency and renewables target, also to deploy heat pumps and to deploy solar technologies on buildings, and specifically as regards Energy Efficiency Directive. The initially proposed target of 9% is increased to 13%. And in the EPBD, Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, there are new provisions on mandatory installation of solar rooftop panels in new buildings, first for public buildings, then for residential buildings, as well as progressive ban of subsidies to fossil fuels technologies in buildings, so ban of subsidies to fossil fuel boilers, and then a ban of installation of these boilers overall. So this is the proposal. And now I will focus more on the Energy Efficiency Directive proposal, which is being negotiated, just to set also the context of the negotiations, just to let you know that we have now both co-legislators who define their position to the Commission proposal, and we will now enter into the phase that is called trilogue. So the Commission, the Council, Member States represented by the Council, the Czech Presidency, and also the European Parliament will discuss in this trilogue, in this dialogue of three parties, what should be the text, what should be the shape of this future directive. So it's an Energy Efficiency Directive recast, so we'll have a totally new directive with new numbers, new numbering. But content-wise, the main elements of this revision are the following. The target, which I already mentioned, initially proposed at 9%, comparing to the 2020 reference scenario, and then increased by REPowerEU to 13%. Second very important element is to put into the legal framework the energy efficiency first principle. So there is a dedicated Article 3, which is putting this into the legal framework, as said, and also highlighting that energy efficiency first principle should be considered in all policy, planning and investment decisions. So whichever strategic decision, long-term decision is taken, it should be considered across the whole system how it would, what will be the energy consumption overall, and whether there are other more efficient alternatives to a given solution. The third important element is the energy savings obligation target, which is set in the proposal to 1.5%. Just to let you know, this is being implemented in various member states by energy savings obligation schemes, with sometimes the white certificate schemes. So just to let you know that this is related to that, and this will be a future Article 8. Currently Article 7, in the future Article 8. What is also important that under this obligation, fossil fuels related technologies will not be accountable anymore. That's the Commission proposal. Means that, for example, if there are subsidy programs in member states subsidizing, I don't know, gas boilers or fossil fuel boilers, even though, you know, if there is an achievement of energy savings, final energy savings through this change, through this investment, it cannot be accounted under Article 8 target 1.5%. And then the fourth element important to highlight in the current discussion context is a very big focus on public sector. And here I will have a separate slide, so I will not stop more on this. And then finally, a totally new definition of efficient district heating and cooling, which is progressively phasing in more and more renewables into the district heating and cooling, and progressively phasing out, of course, fossil fuels, and also increasing the input of waste heat. So that will be the new definition, and I have also a separate slide on this. So going more deeply into the public sector exemplary role, there is a new chapter dedicated to public sector in the Energy Efficiency Directive, which is composed of 3 articles. Article 5, focusing on the public sector overall and setting a target of final energy consumption reduction for the whole public sector, which in the Commission proposal is 1.7%. So all the subsectors will count towards this target, means public transport, buildings, public buildings, water treatment, street lighting, all public services can account towards this consumption reduction target, energy consumption reduction target. Then Article 6 is focusing on public buildings, so buildings that are owned or occupied by public bodies. Here the definition is extended because, as you probably know, in the current directive, the focus of renovation of public buildings is only on central government buildings, and in the revised recast directive, this is enlarged to all the public administration levels and to all buildings of the public sector. And here the target is 3% of renovation of the useful floor area of buildings, of public buildings per year. And this applies to buildings larger than 250 square meters. And I need to also underline that here very much the use of energy performance contracting is promoted in relation to this obligation. And then the third article in this chapter of public sector is focusing on public procurement and application of energy efficiency first principle and energy efficiency requirements into the public tenders. A few more words about Article 6 and the renovation of public buildings target. It applies, as said, to all public buildings owned by public bodies, and also these public buildings need to be renovated to nearly zero energy building level. So it must be a deep renovation. That's the new proposal. Regarding Article 7, public procurement, here we have a very detailed provisions on how energy efficiency should be taken into consideration in public procurement. Those are specified in Annex 4. And it depends really on type of product or service that is being purchased by public sector. If a product, for example, belongs to the category that is under the energy labeling obligation, those products, for example, need to comply with the highest most populated energy efficiency class. So this is just an example, and there is much more lengthy list of specific provisions how to apply energy efficiency in public procurement. So that's all about public sector. A few more words about this new definition for district heating and cooling, because district heating is also an area I consider where energy performance contracting could possibly develop. And just to let you know that progressively the definition of this efficient district heating and cooling will strengthen the share of renewables and waste heat in the heat supply. So this you can see here on the slide, from 2025 to 2050, will progressively phase out other sources of energy in heat supply through district heating, and finally in 2050 the heat should come only from renewable energy sources or from waste heat, where renewables should be at least 60%. And finally, now we are getting to the specific provisions that are promoting energy performance contracting and ESCO type of business, let's say. Currently, this Article 18 in the current directive, and because we are doing this recast, so there will be new numbering, and it will be a future Article 27. So currently, this Article 18 is setting kind of framework conditions for the energy performance contracting market development by providing, for example, requiring member states to provide the contractual, let's say, side, so templates of contracts or closures for energy services. Also the financial side, so dedicated financial instruments. Also, as regards the provision of these services, so certified and qualified energy service providers, monitoring and verification tools, so how to make sure that we are measuring energy savings in the same manner and that this guarantee is based on the same methodology. So All this should be developed and promoted by member states in order to facilitate ESCO business and energy performance contracting development. Member states should also support providing information, removing barriers, promoting advisory services. So creating, trying to match the demand and the supply of these services by dedicated advisory services and technical assistance. Finally, member states should encourage to develop quality labels based on European and international standards, because everything about energy efficiency is about the trust, about this guarantee of performance, guarantee of savings that it will generate, and that's why it's so important to have quality labels and to have standards, and that the trust is built between the contracting parties. And then, as regards the new elements that Article 27, the future Article 27 will bring, it is very much focused on promoting energy performance contracting in public sector, because indeed public sector has this potential to drive this market, to develop this market, and public buildings represent a really very, very large share of buildings, and there is a big potential for savings, and that's why there is focus. So for renovation of large public buildings, the uptake of energy performance contracting is very much encouraged by the directive, and also for those that are above 1,000 square meters, public bodies will have to assess the feasibility of using energy performance contracting. So before getting to the renovation, they need to assess whether energy performance contracting could be applied in this renovation. And then enhancing the advisory body's role in the market. So as said, to help matching the demand and supply side, and helping the market development. What I also would like to highlight is that we have a kind of trigger in this Article 27 for the possible future development of energy performance contracting service offer, because it says that it should combine energy performance contracting with demand response and storage and other type of services that could be delivered by the demand side to the energy system. So this is a very interesting provision, which is fully open, and then we can see how the market could potentially develop on this. I will say a few words more about energy performance of buildings directive, because it's very also relevant for our discussion today, where the revision of the directive will put some very strong elements that will accelerate renovation of buildings in Europe. First and foremost are the minimum energy performance standards. So probably you heard that the directive is proposing the minimum standard of energy performance, first for non-residential and public buildings. So this minimum will be class F as of 2027 and class E as of 2030. And then for residential buildings, class F as of 2030, and then class E as of 2033. So it means that we will phase out from Europe all the worst performing buildings. They will need to be renovated. This is an obligation. This is a mandatory provision to renovate buildings to the levels that are the minimum. Then the directive also proposed the national buildings renovation plans that will replace the long-term renovation strategies. It is also proposing a new definition of deep renovation, which will be a renovation to zero emission buildings level, and this level is also defined by the proposal. It is also strengthening the requirements for recharging electric vehicles, and also removing subsidies for fossil fuel boilers as of 2025, and the Repower EU is actually proposing to accelerate this even to 2025. So already mentioned nearly zero energy buildings for new buildings. This standard will be replaced by a new standard, zero emission buildings, where the remaining energy that needs to be provided to the buildings must be provided by on-site renewables or efficient district heating or energy from energy communities. So the local generation from renewables is promoted through these provisions, and yeah, that's the proposal how energy emission zero emissions buildings should be defined. And yes, this I already mentioned. Other elements, I think that to accelerate, I would just say that of course all this will require huge investments. This was estimated already for Fit for 55 package. It was estimated that to achieve energy efficiency target of 9% by 2030, it will require around 150 billion euro, and the repower even increase this further, because to phase out the dependence on Russian fuels by 2027, we must invest much more and much faster. So the financial resources, on the other hand, are also unprecedented, because both the MFF and the next generation EU funds that were put on the market after the Corona crisis are of unprecedented level. So maybe I will not stop too long on this, and then go to my last slide, and leaving some time for questions and discussion afterwards. Thank you very much for your attention, and happy to discuss later.
Thank you very much, Margot. And it's an incredible piece of work that's been going on in this recasting. Hugely important, of course. It already was, but it's even more so because of the recovery and, of course, the current energy crisis. And very interesting to see the way you're looking at modernising things, allowing for innovation, bringing renewables and energy efficiency and advanced energy management systems together. And also, really highlighting the role of the public sector, and of course, lots of provisions in there to hopefully encourage the ESCO market. But we'll come back to that when we have our discussion shortly. And if we could go to our next poll, please, we'll see what our audience is thinking. So the next poll is asking us what the 3 most important success factors for ESCO interventions are. And we've thought, of course, and talked a lot about having a supportive legal and regulatory framework. That's clearly very important. Access to budgets, of course, traditionally in some places ESCOs, either deliberately or inadvertently, have not been able to access public budgets. So it's really important that changes, and likewise for subsidies where they must exist. Interesting to see the customer demand question coming up here, and kind of noting, of course, that the ESCO associations, both the European and the Global ESCO Association, and many of their members spend a lot of time on explaining why ESCOs work and trying to encourage customers to kind of trust the ESCO model. So interesting to see how important that is coming through. Good. Well, we'll take those responses away and have a think about what they mean, and come back to some of them perhaps in the questions too. So now I have the great pleasure to introduce my colleague Cornelia Schenk from the International Energy Agency, who's going to talk to us a bit about our observations on the developments of ESCO markets in recent times. Thank you, Cornelia. The floor is now yours.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you can see my screen already. I will give you a brief run through the global ESCO market developments, and also some of the ESCO models that are applied to overcome remaining barriers to the ESCO market. Sorry, I just need to switch here a little bit. First, I want to give.
Cornelia, we can't see your screen.
You cannot? Okay. Wait, give me a second. Can you see now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry, there was a technical glitch. Thanks for highlighting that. I first wanted to give a quick overview of how global energy investments and energy efficiency investments have developed over the past years, so focusing on 2021 and giving a bit of an outlook of 2022. So overall, we see that the energy investment is set to rise by 7% in 2022. That's of course an estimation, reaching 2.3 trillion US dollars against the backdrop of the global energy crisis and all the implications coming with that. But more than half of the increase in capital spending is also linked to higher costs due to the crisis. We can see that end-use and efficiency spending makes up around a quarter of overall global energy investment. And also clean energy investment has increased to about 1.4 trillion US dollars, which is mainly driven by investments in renewable energy and efficiency, and power sector and electric vehicles. But we also see that the investment in clean energy is concentrated in advanced economies and in China. In other emerging and developing economies, we see that the investment levels remain broadly at 2015 levels. So there are some disparities that need to be taken account of. And we had a report last year looking at the clean energy investment, specifically in emerging and developing economies, that also concluded that the investment needs to expand more than sevenfold in those economies to reach levels that it would be consistent with our net zero emission scenario. So there is a big challenge in scaling up investment. When we look at broader efficiency spending, so we have clustered that in efficiency and electrification for end use, also looking at renewables for end use by sector, so everything behind the meter investments. We see a record spending in 2021 after a couple of years of stagnation. So in 2021, we had highs of around 485 billion US dollars, which is a 27% increase compared to 2020 levels. And we expect some further increases in 2022, around 16%, but we are not yet through the year, so we will see how the current market trends play out. So they will hinge a little bit on continued government support and enabling policies to shape consumer and corporate demand. We have indicators that correlate with energy savings related investments, looking at construction, looking at vehicle sales, looking at industrial value added. We have recent spikes in fuel prices. All of that could be conducive to renewed interest in energy efficiency. But we also have, as Paolo already mentioned, we have rapidly increasing interest rates, we have higher costs of construction, industrial materials, etc. So there are very diverse developments. Yeah, I had quickly mentioned that when we look at the current levels of global investments, we are at a good point at the moment, but we need to increase the annual investments by 4 times to actually reach a scenario that is compatible with our net zero emissions by mid-century, and to keep our climate goals inside. That is structured here in electrification investments and end use versus efficiency, where you can see that in the building sector there's a big focus on traditional efficiency measures. Transport efficiency would increase expectedly as well, but more dynamics will be also in the vehicle electrification. And as was already mentioned, governments will not be able to mobilize all the required investment to reach our climate ambitions. This is where ESCOs can come into play. Governments need the mobilization of private capital and further investments, and also require support in the implementation of such finance. So energy efficiency improvements need a lot of detailed analysis, communication, engagement with consumers, and that's exactly where ESCOs would have a role to play. When we look at the spending that is currently earmarked for sustainable recoveries, which is being tracked by the IEA as well, we can see here with the bright blue bars that we are, as of March 2022, which was the last time we took a big stock taking, and we will update in fall. We are right now at about $710 billion that are earmarked for sustainable recoveries. If we compare that with the public spending of the financial crisis in 2007 and 2008, which is the dark blue line here, we can see that we're about 40% higher at the moment. So it's the largest ever clean energy recovery effort at the moment, but there's also a widening gap between advanced and emerging and developing economies. So advanced economies dedicate about 10 times more fiscal resources to sustainable recoveries. And a lot of emerging and developing economies have to focus their fiscal capacity on health measures, emergency support for households and businesses, to keep fuel affordable, to keep food affordable, etc., due to the rising market prices overall. And we also see a lot of announced additional spending from governments now with the starting of the winter heating season. A lot as short-term affordability measures to protect businesses and households from spiking prices. When we look at how the spending packages are structured, we can see that energy efficiency and transport spending for low carbon transport and mass transit and alternative transport modes are about 60% of this sustainable recovery spending. And we also have different challenges to the implementation of this spending, not just in emerging developing economies, but also in advanced economies. So we still face global supply chain constraints, concerns over energy security and affordability, and challenges of uptake related to information that is available to consumers about which instruments are in place, administrative hurdles related to the uptake of those financing packages. And with that, I would switch to our ESCO market overview, which is as well based on an annual survey. We have conducted that at the start of the year together with Global ESCO Network, where we have shared the survey with all ESCO associations worldwide, plus additional stakeholders in the sphere and policymakers, also in countries where no ESCO association exists, and have based that on additional research and interviews, but also some of the numbers, same as Paolo had indicated, are based on the best estimates available for the market. And we do see that overall the ESCO market is on an upward trend. We still see COVID-related constraints in several markets, while there are some government support policies in specific markets, and also market pull factors that support growth in several markets. China remains the main market globally, with close to $22 billion US dollars investment in ESCO projects in 2021. That's a 12% increase compared to the year before. And developments in this market are driven a lot by the government's commitment to carbon neutrality by 2060, increased decarbonization efforts that are related to that, and a strong focus on the building sector in China at the moment. We see other Asian markets with different developments. So we did see an increase in Japan, whereas Philippines reported still a lot of COVID-related impacts on the market, but expectations of new regulatory developments on energy efficiency that would support the market could change the picture from 2022 onwards. We also saw a positive development in the US market, also supported by positive governmental policy developments. So we saw, for instance, a new energy efficiency and conservation block grant program with a budget of about $550 million that would allow the use of energy performance contracting by states and local governments for the first time. That is also a big step for the ESCO market. For the European market, we did see some markets with growth, other markets which were negatively affected by the COVID-19 pandemic and saw rather declines and difficult situations. But Paolo here presented the more recent update in the market. Canada is an interesting market as well. So there was a decrease in the number of public sector projects, but also stronger project aggregation. And in Canada, we saw the launch of a private sector super ESCO in end of 2020, beginning of 2021, which could be an interesting market development as well. Looking at the sectoral allocation of ESCO projects worldwide, the share of ESCO projects in the public sector is traditionally larger in Europe, Northern America, and China, but we have large parts of Asia, including Japan, Philippines, or Malaysia, where the private sector projects dominate. Turkey is another example where private sector projects are stronger. Also, quite well known, the building sector is dominant in a lot of economies, particularly in Europe and also in many markets in Asia. We did see in China that the building sector reached a share of 50% of the market for the first time, which was driven to a large degree by positive policies from the government. As I mentioned, the carbon neutrality commitment. We also saw a new carbon assessment framework for buildings and the introduction of new financing schemes. And the industry sector also contracted due to some impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, lockdowns, labor shortages, etc. In Mexico, for instance, we had a change of the market, so the shift of the government focused more. Shifted more to renewable energy projects. So municipal energy efficiency projects received much higher attention and brought a big change in the markets. And also municipal services accounted for about 10% of projects in a number of Asian markets. And we see in Turkey, for instance, and in Japan, we do have the industry sector as quite important. The transport sector is traditionally underrepresented in ESCO interventions, but electric vehicle fleet acquisitions could be offering new opportunities if considered under the ESCO market. So in Canada, the fleet acquisitions are now eligible under energy performance contracting. In India, we see huge bulk procurement programs, maybe the tendering of 5,450 electric buses by CESL is known here. We also asked for the critical enablers for ESCO interventions, non-surprisingly, supportive policies, subsidies, customer demand, so the market pull, and rising energy prices were mentioned here. So we can see that the current energy crisis does hold promise for positive market developments, but there's also some threats due to supply chain constraints. And that brings me to my last slide, looking at the market hurdles and some models that actually are applied globally to address the perceived market barriers. I think the market barriers for ESCO markets are well known. So I wanted to mention three of those mechanisms that are applied. One is aggregation. So we see a rise of both public and private super ESCOs. So aggregation is used as a strategy to achieve scale and reduce costs, while also mobilizing funds from multilateral sources. We have, as I mentioned, the establishment of the private super ESCO in Canada. We also see the establishment of super ESCOs in Kenya and in Senegal, which would be public sector ones, and the bulk procurement example through the established super ESCO in India. We also have several mitigation measures that are applied. So we do see some energy savings or carbon reduction insurance mechanisms that are being applied. So one is an energy savings insurance model that was implemented in Latin America, in Colombia and Mexico quite successfully, which is now being replicated through a project in 3 countries in Europe. And it's also developed or planned in 10 other countries in Latin America and Asia. And we also have an uprising of new business models, which are to a large degree based on digitalization, which could bring a paradigm shift in looking at monitoring and verification, in enhancing customer relations and reporting, but also analyzing the energy efficiency potentials and servitization business models. Be it efficiency as a service, cooling as a service, or even charging a battery as a service, make energy efficiency systems more widely accessible and affordable, where clients would benefit from the better performance of energy systems, from energy savings and emissions reductions, without actually making the upfront investment, which would be done by the super ESCO, and the client receives services and pays for the services received without having the ownership of the physical asset. And that's it for a brief market overview. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Cornelia. And you know, we've seen that the market's not moving the way we'd like it to, but we also are seeing some new models. So I think we'll skip the next poll because we're getting short of time and go straight to Alex. Now, we've seen very strongly that people think ESCOs could be doing more. They're not doing as much as we'd like. But is digitalization the answer to that? And I'm hoping Alex is going to tell us the answers, yes, please. So Alex is a member of the US Association and the Business Development Director for Sustainability at Honeywell. So over to you, Alex, please.
Good morning to all. The coming couple of minutes, I will be zooming into the role of digitization and the implementation of energy performance contracting, which is a very interesting domain and a very quickly evolving domain as well. Why is that digitization so important for energy performance contracting? Well, we all know that when we work with the EPCs, we basically have a lot of data to process for all kinds of reasons within this contract framework. It is baseline. It is, of course, the identification of energy conservation measures, monitoring purposes, as well as the back end of the process is measurement and verification planning. We also have, since some time, a huge benefit in terms of ICT technology that evolved in very powerful data centers and infrastructure that can process a huge amount of data in a fast manner, and running also smart algorithms for that. We also do have the potential of the artificial intelligence that is not new, actually, that existed since some time, but was limited because of the absence of technology. And also data mining and machine learning that is becoming very powerful these days. And it allows us to do much more less manual effort and do much more less semi-automated effort and do things in full automated mode. Obviously, the high energy pricing is accelerating even what I would call the acceleration, which was already on the radar screen for a couple of years with the initiative of the Green Deal. So a fast implementation is even more relevant today than it was even in the past, and bundling much more assets which will translate very quickly in larger ENPCs. So having larger ENPCs means obviously even more data to process, and therefore digitization will slightly become a must within the ENPC context. On the other hand, then the digitization allows more accuracy as well on that data, performance outcomes, which obviously are guaranteed, and that is a need for financing. And of course, performance contracts are seen as a kind of an insurance and a warranty to obtain these financing schemes in order to feed these projects and implement them. And last but not least, powerful platforms are developing and even available right now that are specifically monitoring and managing the carbon footprint and the energy efficiency progress you make. And these platforms are based on a software as a service model, which means it can be made sizable to the project, the program, and the ESCO companies that will use them. So need for large and faster ENPC implementations, and of course, like I said, very much depending in the future in terms of being able to do that on the technology and of course digitization behind it. Now, what will digitization actually bring in more concrete terms? If you look at the current state, there's still a lot of manual processing work to be done, right? So data is going to be pulled from certain systems or even measured through measurement campaigns. Some of it is historical. That data is not free of errors. There could be human errors inside that, of course, has an impact on the accuracy. That's why, in some cases, some level of tolerance is taken on the performance obligations. To accommodate that, it's not real-time visible scenarios on savings, and obviously, because of the lot of manual interaction, it is also, in many cases, not competitive compared to the technology we have today. And the future stage on the right-hand side shows what it can bring. So you can bring automated processes to collect and analyze and further optimize the ECMs and the data requirements. It is a leading indicator for performance guarantees and outcomes. And there are algorithms, more and more performant algorithms available to do data cleansing and improve the quality of the data, which translates obviously also in more accuracy and better outcomes. There are powerful dashboards and automated alerts available to monitor the progress you make. It is an integrated solution, cloud-based, and it can integrate also other variables that can bring some level of prediction, like weather forecasts, for instance. And higher guarantees to the projected savings ratio can be produced for larger bundles of assets and larger programs as well. Now, how does that translate? What are these areas of digitization within the ENPC context? And one of the strong upcoming technologies within this arena is what we call the non-invasive load monitoring disaggregation. And that is specifically important because a lot of clients are not always having readily available historical data on their consumption with sufficient detail. Of course, main meter information is available, but then when it comes to sub-meter details in terms of assets consumption, then you're getting on a very regular basis into an issue. And then long time-taking measurement campaigns may be required to establish a baseline. Now, this non-invasive load monitoring disaggregation is basically a technology that is built into smart meters or smart meters that are connected to a platform. And it can actually clamp over power lines, and it basically reaches the consumption. But not only reaches the consumption, it also analyzes based on what we call the electrical signature, and that's where the load disaggregation is coming in. So each of the loads, or each of the assets that are connected to these power lines, they have a specific electrical signature that can be detected by artificial intelligence out of these meters or these platforms. And these meters and platforms can also be learned on certain new assets that they may not know about, and they are able to detect. And by switching on and off these assets, they can also identify within the mix of the total consumption what the consumption of these assets or these loads will be. very powerful technology that continues to evolve very quickly, and I'm pretty convinced we'll see it coming more and more relevant within the NPC world. Energy baselining, sorry, is another one. Of course, the usual inputs on schedules and historical data are still there in a manual or semi-manual format. But another component that becomes, of course, more and more important from a pure prediction perspective are things like weather conditions and others. All of that is getting to a modeling choice based on artificial intelligence and machine learning enabled regression models. And these regression models allow also not only to precisely map out the baseline consumption, but also have a level of prediction as well. The more smarter these algorithms become, the more predictive variables it can consider, and of course, the more prediction on the baseline can be rolled. Another one, that's the back end of the NPC process, where digitization is important, is a measurement verification, monitoring and reporting. And it is not limiting to purely collecting and measuring against the baseline. It is also allowing for measurements to be analyzed and do some level of data cleansing to increase the quality of the data. It can also do some level of normalization, which is usually done in a manual way, and some baseline adjustment based on certain variables or the way assets are used outside the conditions that are set up front in order to obtain the maximum amount of savings. And in addition to that, it can bring customized reports, both regulatory as well as for the project purposes, as well as dashboards to follow it through in real time. And then once you get into a more program mode where you combine a set of portfolio of energy performance contracts, you can come with this kind of platforms that not only map out how you do on carbon emissions and energy usage, and of course the utility bills, but it can also project the savings, the energy losses, and the identified ECMs through artificial intelligence. And it even tries to identify what your top performing projects are. It can detect the anomalies you have in your portfolio, things that are not going right, that needs a certain intervention. And it can also detect additional energy conservation measures based on the data, both historical as well as live data that comes in. So, beautiful technology, and it will eventually help us to move much more faster and bundle much more larger projects and gets faster, hopefully, towards a zero carbon scenario. Thank you.
Many thanks, Alex. Really inspiring and really encouraging that maybe we can see that paradigm change that we're all so desperate to see. I mean, we have been talking about ESCOs for, well, since the 1990s, and we've seen this, very gradual growth. But it looks like we could see a paradigm change that we genuinely need now. Could I ask all the panelists to turn their cameras on, please? And we've just got a few minutes where we can ask a few questions. Hello, Paolo, welcome back. And maybe I could just start with you because you were cut short. And just if you could perhaps summarize in a few words what your main learnings of this series of surveys that you've done and all of the research and studies that you've done, the conversations you've listened to, what would be your kind of 2 or 3 key takeaways of what we need to do next?
I'm saying that the progress list in Europe is very slow. There's been some legislation, some support in some member states, but not enough. But then I listened very carefully to Margot's presentation, and it seems that the recast of the ED will really be a game changer. There will be really political pressure, obligations on the public sector to renovate, to reach a certain target. On the other side, on member state to set up a facilitation, information center, model contract, quality certification of the services. And this should enable finally the EPC market to take off. I think the point of having facilitators, having ESCO ENPC ambassadors is very important, because there is a lot of mistrust. Down at the local level, when you talk to the people working, employee, technical employee, or procurement employee in a municipality, for example, in particular the smaller one, they don't know about the energy performance contract, how does it work, why they should go through a very complex standard procedures. They used to procure works or services, but not combine. And it's always you procure something and you pay when it's delivered. It's not that you pay off with the savings. So it needs a lot of training education for the end user. These are my main recommendations. Thank you again.
Brilliant, and thank you so much. And so we, of course, completely agree with everything you said, but perhaps we can turn to Margot. You've talked about you put various points in your presentation which should encourage the development of the market in Europe. So maybe you could just summarise your thoughts on what member states can do, should do next in order to make that development, make the paradigm change we need, and make the best of the ESCO market, as an investor in energy efficiency.
Thank you, Melanie. So, and many thanks to Paolo for his opinion on the EED recast. Indeed, we also hope that this will be the game changer. To summarize what member states could and should do according to the EU policy to promote ESCO markets and energy performance contracting development, specifically it's to help to develop the framework conditions for this business to run. So as it is already in the directive, and it will be strengthened in the future, providing the contractual elements, kind of standardized contract closures, the financial elements, so that the financing is also provided by the market, and also, of course, to build the trust of the markets, to bring the demand and the supply side together to ensure quality of the services, quality insurance, etc. But this is specifically for ESCOs related provisions. But in more broadly speaking, basically the push towards buildings renovation, decarbonization of buildings, and the general framework of the decarbonization energy efficiency is this enabler. And what also I would like to highlight, I don't know, this is my opinion, but I think that strengthening electrification of buildings is also very important. In the context of the presentation by Alex of digitalization as the enabler, I also think it's a great enabler, but I think more end users will be electrified, especially in buildings like heating or hot water provision. More this enabler will have leverage, to provide the right data, because we have already smart meters deployment with some standardized data input and output in Europe, but all this applies to electricity, right? So now the push towards heat pump deployments, electrification of heating, of cooling, of hot water preparation, I think this is a very important trend. And also we saw this in Cornelia's presentation, that this electrification is going up, but what I saw in the slide is mainly in the transport and a little bit less of buildings. Buildings, of course, has the inertia to the installed technologies, but I think that we need for the sake of energy transition, we need to also accelerate the electrification. That's my view. And generally, my view on the future of this energy performance contracting and services, energy services, would be to go beyond what is purely energy efficiency and energy savings at final use, but also incorporate everything that the demand side can provide to the system. And for this, the digitalization is also a great enabler. So it means that extending this business model towards flexibility, renewables generation, and provide as much as possible optimization at the building level and right interfacing with the grid, and provide this type of services to the system and pay off the investments, various investments that will be made at the building level via the system. So by these various services of storage, flexibility, efficiency, generation. So I think that this will be an interesting avenue for this business model to develop, and if such a business model was successful, I think it would accelerate incredibly energy transition in general. Thank you.
Thank you. I was actually going to ask you, it appears to me in the recast that you've put various hooks in there to kind of push but also allow for innovation. You know, have you found that difficult because sometimes people want specificity, or have you found it easy to negotiate the ideas you put forward to make sure that people can innovate in terms of things like business models?
Well, I think that for the moment the hooks are so open that it really does not cut the innovation avenues. Means that we for example, as regards the expanded energy services, we really didn't even define this in the directive. This is totally open, and it's really for the market to define what could be in such a package, you know, of services that can be provided by the demand side to the system. Because we know, all of us, we know that, you know, in the future the energy system will work totally differently. It will be the demand side cooperating with the system, with the supply side, and interacting and interfacing each other in real time. And so we just need this business model to start running and happening in the future. But I think that no, in the directive we were not prescriptive, too much prescriptive to leave the market to define its own way to deliver it.
Yeah. No, I think that's admirable. That's very clear. Thank you very much. Cornelia, you've been looking into various sort of variations of business models here, and you mentioned a few of them at the end of your presentation. Is there any kind of one or two that you think might be, from your observation, particularly valuable to explore more in Europe?
As with everything, I don't think there's a silver bullet or one business model that can be applied everywhere. But it would always depend on the specific market conditions. What I do see as a common line through all the business models is that they address a number of the market barriers, be it bulk procurement programs that might be an option for public sector, big scale projects, building refurbishments, etc. To achieve economies of scale, to get more competitive prices, and to standardize also procurement and tendering processes and achieve better results through that. We see the energy savings insurance model that has been implemented quite effectively in Latin America and is also in development in a number of markets, Asia, Latin America, also in Europe, etc. More with a focus on SME investments, providing a better framework, also providing standardized contracts with guaranteed savings, independent technical validation, preferential financing structures, etc., and some advice to SMEs to actually take up those energy efficiency measures. We also see servitization models that are being applied in situations where the clients would not necessarily want to make an investment in the energy efficient systems themselves, but who are actually happy with a solution that would give them access to the desired services without making these investments, without having them on their balance sheets, without owning them, and that might be applicable in some cases and not in others. So there is not one particularly well adaptive business model, but I believe all of them merit further exploration.
Thank you. Margot, can you see the public sector type ESCOs working in Europe? They've been used to roll out vast numbers of similar types of project in other parts of the world. Do you think that's a model that could potentially work?
Well, yes, that's what we believe in, actually, because the public sector represents a a big share of energy consumption in buildings, and also in other public services, so like public lighting, or there are other services where also ESCO models could be and is already applied. So indeed, that's why there is such a strengthened attention in the directive to the public sector. We also recognize that there are barriers. Those barriers are being addressed, as you know, the accounting problem of public sector accounting, where Eurostat provided the guidance few years ago, and hopefully solving. But there is, as Cornelia said, there is no one silver bullet, because even with this guidance, sometimes we face replies from member states that they are maybe too prescriptive. In others' case, they are not enough. So it's it has to be really adapted to the specific to the specificities of the public sector in a given country. So there are barriers, and that's why we always highlight. The EED, the Energy Efficiency Directive, put very much focus for member states to do their work on removing barriers, identifying the specific barriers, because we cannot do it at the EU level. There is no one-size-fits-all solution. The public sector is differently organized, with different levels of administration, with different level of rules, and this has to be solved at national level, and that's why this framework condition that member states should be promoting for energy performance condition contracting has to be provided at national level.
Great, thank you. So, Alex, it looks like you're going to solve all of our problems for us, and job done. Thank you very much. But a couple of things. Firstly, where do you think, in the very, very short term, the biggest growth area for ESCOs could be following a digitalisation approach? Where should we go for first?
I think obviously these platforms I just indicated on carbon and energy management are going to become more and more visible. And like I said, the bundling is going to be an important element that seems to be coming through. So that basically will be a big enabler of digitization. And these platforms, also including this artificial intelligence and the functionalities I have been indicating in the presentation. One of the things which I personally believe is going to really going to take off, and it's going to be a big enabler, is this non-intrusive load monitoring, because many of us are just struggling with sufficient level of granularity in the data we get, and not getting all the data we need in order to develop ECMs with sufficient accuracy in order to have a performance obligation behind it. So that is these two elements, these platforms, I believe, and non-intrusive load monitoring and disaggregation, that is going to be, in my mind, the big enablers of the future.
Yeah, very interesting. I think that's really important, this real-time monitoring, so that we can firstly assess the saving opportunity accurately, then prove that we achieved it. And that will answer some of the questions Paolo raised in terms of improving trust in the system and the fact that it all works. Alex, from an industry perspective, when you're thinking about what governments can do in this context of creating an enabling environment, what's the top thing you'd ask for from governments in order to support digitalisation in growing ESCOs? What would you ask for?
Well, if you look at the way the reporting, also the regulatory reporting is happening, there are some platforms available, but it's definitely not a common theme. So more and more, I think the need for minimum, let's say, setup of these management monitoring systems is a requirement, and I understood that this is in works. And the reporting should also be more and more digitized as well towards the authorities. So what can they do? They can obviously emphasize very strongly the format in which the reporting needs to happen, which automatically will translate in the utilization of these digital tools and further digitization. That's the way I look at it.
Thank you. Yeah. another very important point. And I think what's interesting about your comments about digitalisation are partly they're about making sure that the projects actually work, and partly they're about the kind of program management elements that so it can contribute to both those things. And they're both areas where we've clearly had problems in the past. Maybe I could give the last word to Paolo and say to Paolo, from what you've heard today, are you encouraged? Do you think, we're finding some new tracks, or what would you say are the one or two things that we need to research further in order to, kind of reap the benefits of the opportunities that we're seeing now?
Yes, thank you. I think I agree that digitalization is important. Most probably will, as again Margot indicated, will couple energy saving with demand flexibility, demand response. In particular, in the short term, we will have scarcity of electricity in Europe, and so more and more buildings may be interested and have an economic return if they can manage not only the total energy consumption, but also the power demand, in particular at peak time. Second point, I think might be something that myself and Cornelia share, is that it's not easy to find data. We need more collaboration by the industry. There was an email I received yesterday. Why in the US they have Lawrence Berkeley Lab as a nice website with all the ESCO project in the public sectors, with a lot of data type of in technology use, cost, type of contract, etc. And we don't have something similar in Europe. So maybe a call more for researchers. Let's try to work together to have more data available on the number of contracts, the type of contract duration, technologies that can serve then the policymaker to better adjust the policy, and of course also to ESCO to have some feedback on what is going to the market and where they can plan strategically to further expand it. Thank you.
Thank you for that, and I think that's a great place to finish. More collaboration. I like those words. So we need collaboration between industry and government, between the associations. There are various areas where by working together, we can break down some of these barriers and I think make things happen faster. So I'm going to, with that, thank the speakers and thank the organisers, thank our pollsters who've been supporting us in the background, and say good afternoon, and we'll take away your thoughts and we'll see how we can use them in future work. So thank you very much, everyone.